Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm chuckling because I have an awesome guest on today, Samantha Graham. How are you?
I am good and happy to be here.
Thank you very much for joining me. Yeah, you're the co-host of Where's Our Participation Trophy podcast, and we're here to talk about first dates and what not to say on a first date. And I want to invite you on to pick your brain because we're both out there. Tell me a little bit about you.
So I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I've basically born and raised here, like living within kind of, 20-ish minutes from the border of the city. We organize the city into Toronto and then the Greater Toronto area. So I've always lived in that kind of spans of land. And I'm not going much further than that, just about an hour west of the city. So close enough to still get all the good parts, but far enough away to be able to afford to do it.
Oh yeah, no kidding. The housing market, is it as wild in your area as it is in Denver?
It sure is. So I think things have cooled a little bit. I think a lot of markets have some more than others. Right, at the height of a lot of what we were seeing, a 1-bedroom condominium, so we're talking, 500-ish square feet, was averaging about $800,000. A 2-bedroom at $1 million. The average house well over $1 million.
Oh, ouch. And so we're here to talk about first dates. Within all the move, did you put dating on pause, or are you trying to kind of like push through all the madness and chaos in your life right now?
Dating is on pause. I think I recognized that there, with so much going on and needing to keep, I've got a day job. I've got, as you mentioned, the Where's Our Participation Trophy podcast. I've got other commitments in my day-to-day life. And then sort of navigating what I was doing with respects to finding a house. And then it was a relatively short closing. So knowing that I was going to jump immediately into the sort of packing and getting everything all set, it made sense to kind of say that I was going to revisit this once I was feeling a little more settled. I think dating can have an effect where things can feel a little bit upended at times anyways. And I didn't want to go into it already feeling chaotic. I think it's, the right mental headspace is always going to be super important to kind of putting your best foot forward, making the right decisions, ultimately giving it a good shot. So it just didn't feel like the right time. And I think for a bit, I didn't know where I was going to end up. So it kind of made sense to get a home base and then decide where to go from there.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like a more mindful approach to modern dating than, say, some of the people that I've matched with on a dating app before. Like, it wasn't too long ago that I matched with somebody, chatted for a day or so, and then found out that she was moving soon. And that's like, okay, what's the point then? It sounds like we're looking for two different things. So your approach sounds a little bit more mindful than that.
Yeah. And I think part of it is recognizing, that, and I was going to make the joke that it might be a little bit more of a fearful avoidance strategy masked well with mindfulness, but, anything to give me a chance to just say, I'll do this later. No, but I think to some degree, maybe there's a slight bit of avoidance. I'm just going to call the spade a spade. But I also think that it's recognizing through a lot of trial and error that I am dating with intention. It wasn't something that I did for the longest time. I didn't even understand the concept because I think for the most part, I knew that I had an end goal, but I really didn't understand that the process had to be intentional as well. So not just an objective, but how you approach it. And so in recognizing that dating with intention meant every step of the way, from those initial conversations, from how you go about meeting people, how you develop a dating app profile looks very different when you're dating with intention versus when you're just kind of winging it, right? And knowing that if I went into it feeling like I was spread a little too thin, not necessarily that I didn't have free time, but just where my head was at, I wasn't in line with dating with intention. And then not knowing where I was going to end up, maybe I'd meet someone great, but he happens to be on the opposite end of Toronto, and now we're in a 2-hour distance from one another that may not work long term.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And sounds similar and familiar to the way that I approach dating when I'm intentional about it. And you slipped fearful avoidant in there as maybe like I'm going to put this on the back burner to avoid dating just for a little bit. Now, how do you connect the two of those things?
Well, because I think that one of the things through doing a lot of kind of sort of self-reflection, self-development type work, especially over the last couple of years when it comes to dating, is recognizing my patterns and recognizing and understanding how kind of attachment theory and attachment style plays a role in my dating life. It was only in the last year that I actually, through working with a therapist, discovered that I'm actually likely more disorganized attachment or that fearful avoidance. So combination of anxiety, but also having the avoidant tendencies versus purely anxious, which was what I thought I was when I discovered the book Attached.
Right.
And literally gasped out loud as he described this personality or this attachment style and went, okay, so this guy knows me and I just don't know him.
You're talking about Amir Levine, the author, when he was writing about the anxiously attached.
The description was just, it felt so spot on. I joke when I say that, you feel attacked because you actually feel really seen. It was the first time in my entire life where dating was concerned, outside of friends who had relatable experiences, but that I actually felt like there was this text that described the situation that I was going through, not in terms of, the outside world necessarily as much as what I was feeling inside, how I was responding to those outside events, and what was going on inside of my head and my body as it was happening. It was a really eye-opening experience.
Right. Yeah, I can relate so much. And when I first picked up on hearing about attachment theory from some clients that were encouraging me to take a look at it, when I first got back out there after a couple of long-term relationships, I resonated most with the avoidant attached. And then I came across fearful avoidant as well as, say, like a smaller percentage of the population, 5% or less fall into that disorganized category. And I was really upset at the beginning. I'm like, I do not want to be this polarizing or this swing, the pendulum swing, but it really did capture how I was experiencing the polarity between who I was dating. Like if I'm dating an avoidant, there's my anxious attachment style, and vice versa. Can you relate to that?
Totally. And I mean, I think that was so eye-opening as I got through more details and learning more about it after that book. That book was just the beginning for me. Because as true fashion, for me, I wanted to dig right in and learn everything I could possibly know as quickly as possible. So it was podcasts, it was, articles online, it was, seeking out a therapist who dealt and had a background in attachment style. Because I really felt like this was going to open up a lot of understanding and ultimately a path forward for me that was going to be far more productive and healthy than what I'd been experienced leading up to it. And I think that, one of the things that I know is challenging for a lot of people is just reading up on these styles and recognizing that, obviously it feels like the ideal is secure for all of the reasons that it would be. And then the more avoidant styles kind of get demonized a little bit because often, even the term dismissive would have that negative connotation. Whereas so much of that is out of your control, just the same as it would be for someone who's purely anxious or preoccupied, right? Yeah. So it was interesting to also learn more about the other styles in terms of not only my experience with them, but being able to better understand them, being able to sympathize with them, if that makes sense. Like, hey, maybe that person wasn't such a jerk after all. Maybe their tendency to pull away is a reflection of something that goes well beyond me and them just kind of being insensitive.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like a really secure way to approach modern dating, in not creating stories about the other person's existence, and having empathy for how they show up, depending on what their life experience has been like. And the more I learn about myself and how I show up in a relationship or in modern dating, the less I want to assume about the other person that I am seeing. And it can come up naturally in conversation. I had a first date not too long ago, where we were talking about books, and she was talking about like, oh, you sound like you're talking and you're into personal growth and things like that. By the way, do you know about Wired for Love? And I happen to be reading Wired for Dating. And she mentioned the word anchor and she mentioned the word island. And I'm like, all right, let's talk about it. And didn't necessarily shy away from it on a first date. And also didn't want to kind of categorize or put that person in a box, basically, because I knew that she was an island. And I'm also can lean more towards an island based on Stan Tatkin's work.
Yeah. And to your earlier point, I mean, not wanting to put people into categories, but also recognizing certain things in them and also how we may respond to that. So, you had suggested that, and I do very much think that these things tend to be spectrums. And so where we find ourselves on a spectrum at any given time is a reflection of a lot of things, in terms of the inner work we've done and where we're kind of at, because I think outside stresses in life can contribute to how we're handling some of the stress that comes from dating. But I very much believe that the other person can, cause the place we sit on the spectrum to shift. And I've experienced similar to you, where I, in the last year, dated someone who I would assess as someone who was quite preoccupied, anxious, and immediately felt myself leaning towards very, very avoidant. But being able to recognize those qualities in that person, and then also ultimately the impact on me, while that situation didn't work out for a lot of reasons, I think it gave me a better understanding in terms of why and who might be the best match for me on a go forward basis.
Right. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And generally, a securely attached person would be the best choice for us, right?
Yeah.
And what I heard you describing in there is like understanding about the person you're dating and understanding about yourself is like heading towards a place of earned security within the relationship. And it comes down to like the initial conversation and then communication throughout. So how do you initially see it showing up, or the conversation beginning about attachment styles?
So, and I think that this is something interesting that I'm still now trying to figure out as I navigate dating with all of this information, because something that I've recognized is that your ability to intellectualize something is sometimes also emotional avoidance, because I can think it through and I can explain it to you and I can tell you all the reasons why I'm doing something, but I'm also not really allowing myself to feel the feelings associated with what's going on. And in an effort to avoid the discomfort from those feelings, I'm putting labels on it and I'm sitting and I'm having very long, in-depth conversations. So it's coming back from not knowing anything to feeling like I know too much and trying to get this Goldilocks, like I need things to be just right. And realizing that approaching attachment style in the beginning is a bit like walking into a cold ocean. You're going to take small steps and test it out, recognizing that taking a plunge is going to be very jarring, not necessarily just for you, but the other person. Because having these conversations out of the gate is a lot like intimacy, and it needs to be sort of you want to treat it with a little bit of caution, in the sense that you can't force it, and you want to get there slowly. So at times I will have general conversations about it in ways that it might come up slightly more organically if it does. And I try not to steer the conversation there intentionally as much as I want to. But if it does come up, just talking about it in general, gauging what the other person's understanding is of attachment theory, if they know their attachment style, just very general conversation, as opposed to let's sit down and figure out if we're compatible based on the things on this quadrant, right?
Right. Yeah, that would be bringing a lot of unknowns into the first conversation. Like we really don't know how the two histories that we have together would come together and meld or blend, because in every relationship that we begin, we have two histories. Some are shinier, some are more sunshine and rainbows than others. And others, we all bring our stuff to the relationship. And I really appreciate how you approach it in kind of a slow startup way. Like, I didn't hear you say tiptoe, but I did hear you say slow steps to test the water on a first date. Like, if it comes up, what is comfortable for the fearful avoidant or the avoidant tendency to approach on a first date?
In terms of conversation, I mean, and again, it's really recognizing that, well, and it's funny, and I don't know if you've experienced this yourself, but it feels like I don't have the attachment styles or that sort of attachment reaction doesn't really get activated in the beginning. So I'm not anxious and I'm not necessarily avoidant because there's really no attachment to be had yet. Assuming that I've had, a small degree of interaction with this person leading up to the date, which would be ideal. I do like to build rapport. I'm not someone who jumps right in after one or two conversations, let's meet up. I like to build rapport through text or even phone calls. I'm a big phone call person. Mm-hmm. Despite being an elder millennial, I still do like the phone. But I think it's a nice way to just kind of gauge, do we have the ability to have a conversation? It lends a certain degree of comfort for me to know that, I can carry on a conversation with this person. It's going to be something that's going to be, remotely comfortable to do. It helps me squash some nerves that you might have first date associated with that. But I generally don't like to let that go on for too long. So I haven't formed a sense of attachment yet. I noticed in the past when I let it drag on too long, I was getting attached to an idea about a person that didn't exist because I'd created this person in my mind.
Right.
And it was important to not do that. And it was important to say, let's just go meet the person who's on the other end of this interaction rather than create something and end up disappointed when they don't meet the expectations you have for them based on ideas you dreamt up in your own mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like it aligns with your intentional dating plan when you are out there dating. And let's just say that, like, referring to how your attachment style doesn't get activated until maybe after that first date or later on, in the communication before the first date, let's say that they are not a texter, like 2 days goes by, and or on the other side, like rapid fire texts back and forth. Like, knowing too much about attachment styles can get us into a wrong mindset about making assumptions about this person of like, oh, this person is really available via text, and those come out rapid fire. So I'm going to pull back. That's my tendency. And on the other side, like, I ask a question and the 4 days go by and you're like, well, if we're aligning here on shared values of communication, well, that doesn't really line up with my communication. So I'm going to push them away like the avoidant would. Does that resonate?
Yeah, and it does. And I think, again, it's going from what feels a little bit like a tendency that I'm working through versus what I know in my mind. And so I very much used to just adore the all day, every day texter right out of the gate. It filled up my bucket in terms of reassurance, false reassurance, but it felt pretty reassuring that this person was super interested in me. From morning to night, they wanted to talk to me. And I didn't have the uncertainty of knowing when I was going to hear from them again because it was so frequent. There wasn't time to build up that anxiety around, are they going to ghost? Have they lost interest? Where are they gone? Right. It was only through doing the work that I realized that isn't a healthy way to approach it. The consistent messaging is not indicative of a true bond. You don't know one another. They might be excited about you, and that's great. But it's not indicative of anything going forward. And in fact, it's been my experience that those who come out of the gate that rapid fire, what starts that fast tends to end as abruptly.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of burns out. There might be reasons on their end in terms of why they have this need to kind of fill a void or do whatever. But ultimately, without knowing all of the possibilities of why they're doing it, I was able to determine that, you know what, as much as this can feel really good, it's because it's soothing something inside you that you probably need to work on soothing yourself so that you don't respond favorably to things that aren't in fact favorable.
Yeah, I hear so much of myself in your share that like, oh yeah, it feels good. It feels reassuring. It feels like I have certainty in this person's communication style. And it does create an image in my mind of like who I think this person is. I think that social media, I think that Disney has a lot to do with like romanticizing the fireworks in the beginning. So it does really land with my tendency to lean towards anxiously attached if I'm feeling somebody pull back or somebody distance themselves from me. So like, okay, I'm going to fill the space in between the two of us that was left vacant by the person pulling back, withdrawing, or distancing themselves. So that really hits home for me in the initial talking stage. So you said that you don't choose to have that talking stage go on for very long, and you want to maybe have a phone call or two to kind of gauge who this person is, what their communication style is like, and does that build anticipation or attraction, or is that like more of a trust and a safety thing for you?
I think it can be all of the above. As far as, the attraction in the sense that, I'm going to be very attracted to the way somebody thinks. That's been something that I've really noticed, is that a person who is smart and their kind of brain fires off in a really unique way is this really attractive quality. I think that's way easier to gauge over the phone. So much gets lost through text, especially if you aren't familiar with the person's tone or the way that they might try to tell a joke may not land the same way until you know someone, and then you understand their sense of humor, and it just resonates better. So I like those phone calls for that. I think it does give me a sense of not so much safety, but just the reassurance that this will go okay. Not long term, that this will be something. It's just, this isn't going to be awkward. This isn't going to be, something that I'm going to wish I had not kind of committed to doing, and I'm going to need to try to find a way out of. And I think that for the most part, whether it's a coincidence or whether the strategy works, I've been fortunate that I've never really been on a date where I've wanted to get up and leave. I know some people have,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of right out of the gate. This is just not a comfortable situation because the person is, behaving in ways that are just not acceptable. I've been lucky in that regard. And I've always had, I know you've done podcasts where, one of your recent ones, you talked about keeping dates to about an hour threshold. And I definitely don't follow that rule at all. I've had dates that go a couple of hours. I do the dinner first date. I know that there's, the verdict is out on whether that's advisable or not, depending on which coaches you're talking to. I've had dates that went, I think one of them was 6 or 7 hours, because we met up before a concert and had drinks, and then we went to the concert together, and then we hung out after the concert. So it was this sort of very long thing. But it was because I had the comfort going in, and I felt that there was already an established connection, that I was able to even agree to something like that without thinking twice that I had signed up for this marathon of a date.
Right. Yeah, it sounds as if like the concert date was going well, and then you wanted to continue to enjoy each other's presence. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah. And I think it was that blend of an experience versus conversation. So, like I said, we met up for drinks, we were able to sit and chat. There was a fair going on at the time, so we were there, and then the concert venue was, next door. So we went over to that. For the most part, during a concert, you can't really converse, so you're just sort of experiencing something together. And then there was opportunity to pick up the conversation from there, and I had felt like this was something that I wanted to do, that part not being in the original plan. So that was very
Right.
spontaneous, and as a
Right.
result of kind of the connection that I felt from that date.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm in the camp of keeping the first date short, hour and a half. Um, I'm not much for meeting up for dinner on a first date. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But ultimately, like the concert that you're talking about, the fair that you went to ahead of time, the drinks ahead of time, at any one point, you really could have said, hey, this isn't the right fit for me. And you could have chosen that I'm not going to do the next step in the date. So it sounds like you had options. Yes, safety is important, but options on like, hey, the connection isn't there for me to spend any more time with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as I've heard more from, the community that addresses dating through TikTok or podcasts that I've listened to, including yours, I've really started to give a lot of thought to, being in this pause situation with dating and going back to dating and doing it differently. So intentionally still, but perhaps taking a slightly different approach. So the 1 hour dates, or something in that ballpark, maybe something more like a coffee,
Mm-hmm.
or a drink or dessert or something, as opposed to committing to a full dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Dating multiple people has not been something that I have ever done, but I know that it's highly advised, again, depending on who you talk to, um, in the sense that it allows you to not attach or get overly invested to one individual. And I've always been of the mindset that, how am I supposed to get to know this person if I'm trying to get to know multiple people? Plus, I have responsibilities and a day job and
Mm-hmm.
other
Yeah.
relationships in my life to foster. I feel like it's surface cleaning. You look like you're doing the work, and from far it feels like you're accomplishing something, but up close you've not gotten a lot done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I've been skeptical of it. But then as I've listened more to the advice that has come through some of these channels, I thought, you've never tried it. And you are where you are today, which is still dating. So maybe you don't have it all figured out, and you might want to take some advice from someone else and just,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? You give it a shot and you just really don't like it. And then you go back to the way you're used to and that you're comfortable.
Right. Yeah, that you bring up such a valid point that like dating intentionally might need a refresh every now and then. Like if
Mm-hmm.
I've always done it this one way of dating one person at a time, it still brought me to this point and I'm still arrived at this point single. So maybe I'm going to open myself up to other options, other opportunities, and not, like you said, not attached to one person. But I think in the very beginning, it's more of a focus than it is an attachment, right? Like having options when you go to a restaurant is a really good thing. You might actually
Mm-hmm.
enjoy the meal even more because the menu has 15 options instead of just one, right? And then when it comes to the dating style that you're talking about of dating more than one person, I do like to think of it as an interview process for another job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that like when you're going out there looking for a new job, you're not just applying to one job and putting all of your eggs in that one basket, especially with like Indeed and LinkedIn and all these online places where you can apply for jobs. No, you generally approach like one field, one career area, and you look at the 10 best job opportunities in that field. And you're like, okay, I'm going to apply for these 10, and maybe 5 reach back out, and maybe 3 actually get to an interview process, and 2 of them go to a second interview and a third interview. And having these options in our lives actually helps us make the best choice for us professionally. Like I get the choice between these 2 job offers in front of me, and like, wow, I actually am more drawn to this one. It's more aligned. The values of the company actually align with me. And the same could be said for dating. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree in the sense, and where it takes me is that sense of scarcity mindset that is often present, especially when we're leaning more towards anxious. that we worry that, you know, if something doesn't work out with someone, this is the last available person. And
Hmm.
intellectually we know that's not true, but our body responds as if we need to cling on to this, because if it slips away, we'll never get another opportunity at love ever again. And I don't
Hmm.
know if you've ever been there, but the cognitive dissonance of knowing in my brain that that is just not true at all. We live in a big, huge world with so many people, and this clearly cannot be the last available man. Um,
Yeah,
I,
right.
I I feel my body responding as though it is, and it's not
Hmm.
this loss of love always, in the sense that it's, you know, rushing out to replace him would be impossible because I wouldn't love someone the way I love him. It's literally scarcity, in the sense that
Hmm.
now I'm going to die alone. I'm responding as if this is now the inevitable outcome. Is there's this panic that is, I will die alone if I don't make this one work. And
Hmm.
being able to recognize that, and that you do sometimes operate from a place of scarcity, is important, because you can catch yourself doing it. But I think, to your point, dating multiple people, at least in the early stages, the first couple of dates, as you start to sort of narrow the playing field, if you will, allows you to reinforce to yourself that there isn't scarcity, that there's some
Right.
degree of abundance, which lends
Hmm.
comfort, in addition to allowing you to be selective, maintain your standards, not be inclined to perhaps bend some of your non-negotiables because you feel like you kind of have to, even though you really don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate the way that you summarized that. And thanks for contributing that, especially in the lens of attachment theory, of that scarcity mindset. And the description that you used there at the end sounded a lot like a securely attached relationship would come out of that process and intentionally dating. So is that what you're leaning more towards, that type of approach when you're intentionally dating in the future?
I think that, you know, conceptually, I am secure, but unfortunately, there are those physiological responses. Like, my amygdala still thinks there's an active threat, there's a saber-toothed tiger, and I'm having the responses still, to the lesser degree, both in intensity and duration, than I used to. Because I also understand what's going on. I'm not trying to resist it. I'm able to self soothe. I'm able to kind of use coping strategies that I just didn't have before, but they're still there. And so it's challenging. And again, cognitive dissonance of knowing better and believing you are secure in all the ways that you can describe it, but then having your body revolt against you,
Hmm.
both quite literally physiologically, as well as the thoughts kind of racing through your mind at the time when you feel activated or triggered, is interesting, to say the least. Um, but but I would say that what I do try to implement is a more pragmatic and therefore secure approach, which is, you know, so being selective enough, in the sense that identifying what my non-negotiables are in terms of what I'm looking for someone, and that fits into dating with intention. That this is what I'm looking for in a partner, being able to identify that it is a partner that I'm looking for. I'm not looking to fill a title. I'm not looking to just check a box and say, I have a boyfriend, I have a husband, I am a
Hmm.
wife, I am a girlfriend.
Right.
I used to be that person. I used to be the person who just wanted to be able to tell people I have a boyfriend, because I thought it meant something about me to have one, or conversely meant something about me to not have one.
Yeah.
Now I recognize the importance of partnership in terms of the role and function it has in your life versus the title or the status that you believe it gives you, right? And so, to look for a partner, and what does that partner look like in terms of qualities, characteristics, values? How do they align with mine? Those are all things that are on the list of non-negotiables. And I know that I have to continue to push forward with those, um, even when I'm tempted to lean towards, but it would be really nice to have someone to do fall things with, because there's all these fall activities and winter activities that are always so fun and romantic to do with someone else. But the important part is that the someone else is the right someone else.
Yeah. I feel that completely. It's coming up on cuffing season, and it's coming up
Mm-hmm.
on leaf peeping season here in Colorado. So I know the fall activities are a lot of fun to snuggle up to somebody and keep warm. Let's say that this new purposeful, intentional dating gets you to a first date. And what is not okay to talk about on a first date?
So one of the things that I have said, and then I've given some thought to, is that there's no such thing as a bad question for someone to ask me. So if we're talking about something that I don't want someone to discuss with me, in the sense that I don't want to put parameters around what someone might want to know, but I reserve the right to want to know why they want to know. And I maintain the personal, accountability and the personal power to set the boundary to say that I'm not comfortable asking that question.
Right.
And in theory, I feel like that is brilliant. In practice, it doesn't work as well because people can come up with some pretty wild stuff that feels very inappropriate and uncomfortable at the time. Because partially that's because their why doesn't align with reasonable or acceptable to me. Some people are just curious and audacious for the sake of being such. So I think it can kind of go off the rails and get out of hand. But I think that there is anything that would force me to answer questions about myself that are kind of a level down in terms of personal detail or forcing some level of intimacy is probably a no-go for a first date. So an example of that would be, really in-depth details about past relationships that I've been in, like really wanting to kind of dig into the nitty-gritty of those relationships. I'm fine if someone wants to know when the last time I've been in a relationship was, if someone wants to know whether or not I've ever been married, whether or not I've had a serious long-term relationships, whether I've lived with someone. Those are details that I think are important because they might tell you a story that's important. But when someone's trying to get a little too familiar, and I'll use a personal example if that's okay.
Yeah, please bring it.
So actually the last official date that I went on, I was telling a story of a previous person that I had gone on a date with. It was the story of my longest first date. And so I have to give a lot of context for this story to make it make sense. And I'm describing the traveling to this date. It required a flight. Like there was a lot happening with that story.
Yeah.
That's the interesting story. But this one is I can't believe he said that for me. And he was really, really, really focused on whether or not me and this individual had slept together during the course of our time together.
Uh-huh.
And I kind of brushed it off the first time, and he revisited the question again, and then probably a third time through the course of the story. He also, during the course of the story, said to me, "You're taking too long to tell this part. Get to the part where you're in Las Vegas."
Okay.
And of course, my reaction was, "Don't tell me how to tell a story."
This is my story.
This is my story. And these details
it's not
matter
be a second
to me.
date anyways.
Yeah. It's not going to matter. But yeah, so sort of that forcing of the question, especially when it was clear that I just didn't want to answer it. Things like that, questions around, sexual history, I think are inappropriate for a first date. Because unless it's been expressed that I intend to sleep with you on this date, it's really none of your business at this point. Things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The urgency or the like emphasis on asking the same question 3 times without picking up on the social cue would definitely be pushing up against my boundaries as well.
Mm-hmm.
Of like, hey, I simply just don't know you well enough to answer that question right now.
Yeah. And I'm not sure that you ever need to know, right? Like in this regard, why would you? Because even if we went on to have several more dates, and even if we were to become intimate with one another, that particular part of the story is inconsequential, because what should matter to you in the future, before you and I become intimate, is whether or not I've had an STD check or something to that effect.
Yeah.
But who I've slept with, where I might have slept with them, how early on in dating I've slept with them, doesn't seem like a necessity. It seems more like an individual trying to gauge, what are my odds of getting lucky tonight based on what happened to you during this time period in your life,
Right.
relative to the story you're telling me.
Mm. Yeah, because whether or not you slept with somebody is not, it's not pertaining to the two of you in that moment. And two completely separate things.
And I think that that's probably then just opens up more things that are inappropriate to talk about. And it's a fine line, because, and something that I think some men do well in and others certainly don't, which is balancing flirting and expressing that this is conversation that's more than just sort of platonic conversation between two people being flirty and being overtly sexual too soon.
Okay.
So leading up to a first date or on a first date, and personal preference is always going to be a factor. What I might find inappropriate might be fine with someone else. But for me, if we're being overtly sexual and it just feels like it's forced, and and especially if someone tests the waters a little bit and it's not being met with reciprocation and it continues, that certainly would go in the no bucket for me.
Right. Yeah. It brings me back to the memory of watching Good Will Hunting for the first time, and they're on a first date, and she says, "Oh, were you looking for a good night kiss tonight?" And he says, "No, I'm looking for good night laid."
Oh no.
And that was like funny for the two of them, but it helped me inform of like how I approach first dates in the future, of like, that's probably not going to be appropriate for me to say on a first date. And the media and movies and TV always embellish the situation. Otherwise people aren't going to watch, So
yeah,
looking to sources like that, TV, Disney, media, social media, even, as a comparison or a parameter to like know our worth in or out of a relationship, is something that we can approach cautiously.
yeah.
What comes up for you there?
I think dating culture is really interesting right now, right? I think that the ability to access people through your phone, this kind of catalog of people, has unfortunately removed a bit of the personal. So leading up to a date, especially meeting someone through an app, um, you know, there is a depersonalization, because you've quite literally swiped on them as if you're trying to pick something from a Christmas catalog to put on your
Right.
Santa list, right? And
Yeah.
you're going, do I like this? Don't I like it? And then you're kind of stacking up your options, your matches, in the order of who would I prefer to reach out to first, based off of,
Right.
this collection of people that I've matched with. And like, now I'm going to prioritize them the same way you would a list of things you want to go out and get from a store. It's shopping. This is me saying, what, these are my 1, 2, 3 top picks, right? And I think that is such a huge change from how dating would have happened pre-app, because you simply just didn't have access to that many people and that much choice. Do I think you have real choice on these apps? No, I don't. I think you have the illusion of choice, but it has the same outcome, which is that people take one step removed and therefore feel a little too comfortable to then treat interactions in ways that they wouldn't had they have met at a Starbucks or a bar or through a sports league or wherever.
Right.
I think there's also been, to some degree, it's been normalized, and this might be a bit of a generational thing, but it's been normalized to jump right into sexting and this more sexual conversation almost literally out of the gate. And so therefore people are doing it more because it's also being received with, decent response from the person on the other end of it. And there is an expectation that it's actually fine. And if it isn't fine for you, navigating that can be tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear your reference to initiating conversation and taking it to sexting like right away. And if you met somebody in a coffee shop, the first thing that you open with is not going to be like Netflix and chill.
Right.
Because you are in person, and I don't know if it's overt accountability or subconsciously, you're just like, oh, this is a real person. And to your cataloging of matches, it's like building a roster of like, oh, this is my
Yeah.
starting pitcher, this is my bench player, and this is the people that I put back down in the minors, to use a sports
Yeah.
analogy. It really does depersonalize, it dehumanizes the people
Hmm.
that we have matched with. Is that what you're trying to say?
I think to some degree it can have that impact on some people. And I think if you've been doing it for a long time and you don't necessarily have a good sense of EQ and all of those other things, I don't think it happens to absolutely everybody. I would venture that that doesn't happen to you to the same degree that it would happen to someone else who hasn't done the work, who hasn't
Okay.
studied, who doesn't, date with intention. And perhaps it comes down to what people's true motives are using apps. Are they there for fun? Are they there truly looking for connection? That would also dictate how they're going to react in that way. But I think you can take bigger risks with your out of the gate message when you've got 3 or 4 people that you could just message
Mm.
if this one fails, right? If we imagine being at a nightclub and there's this beautiful woman and you really want to go up and see if you could buy her a drink, you might have a moment where you say, okay, well, I don't want to screw this up because, I got one chance and she's going to walk away if I don't, impress her right out of the gate or whatever that might look like. But if there was 4 other women scattered out throughout the bar, you might not have that same level of care being applied to the approach or the first initial conversations, because you're like, well, if I screw it up with her, I can just move on and I can just
Right.
move on. And we're not really sort of putting a lot of emphasis on that one individual as a person that we have true interest in. It's just kind of gone a little too far in terms of the numbers game.
Right. Yeah, I feel as if that's a really applicable way to kind of look at it. Like, if this is the in-person scenario and I'm approaching one person or 4 people in the bar authentically and with integrity, well, then I can actually, check in with my scarcity mindset of like, oh, I don't want to screw it up with this one, but I've done enough work, I've done enough looking inward to approach that one person with intention and say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you know what? I saw you from across the bar. I wanted to come over and introduce myself. Where are you from? What's your name? Like, that's about as simple as it can get. And if there's reciprocated effort or interest or attraction, then it could flow from there, as opposed to like, what's my one liner?
Yeah.
What's my attention getter? How do I blow them out of the water in order to
Yeah.
get their interest?
Yeah. And I think the interesting kind of comparison of the two scenarios is that it's very normal, and without judgment, I say this, it's very normal to spark up conversations with 4 people or more, I guess, on a dating app at any given time. You would have active conversations because sometimes your matches expire or you sort of have to express interest in, right out of the initial match, because it's a good strategy. But if you did go up and approach 4 women in a bar and they witnessed you doing this with 3 other women, their reaction to that is going to be probably very different than a lot of us knowing that when we are having conversations on apps, the individuals we're chatting with are likely not only chatting with us. Like, we've kind of changed the way we even force ourselves or require ourselves to feel when it comes to that. Because if I saw a man come up to me and buy me a drink, and then he went over to the woman, a couple 100 feet to my left and did the same, I might feel like this guy's just getting around, and it might not land as well for me. So I think it's just interesting as far as dating culture is concerned, how the ability to meet so many people in a short amount of time has changed what a lot of us are thinking about the action of doing that, and how we respond or need to respond to be able to survive it. Because it is sometimes uncomfortable to be dating someone and thinking this person's dating someone else. Like when they have plans on a Wednesday night, like that might be with another woman, And it's not about, we're not exclusive, so they're not doing anything wrong, but it still nags at you a little bit.
Right. And how do you bring that up? How do you bring up that feeling of, hey, I'm not necessarily comfortable with this right now?
So I think if we haven't had like one of these define the relationship or a conversation around exclusivity, I think it is a safe bet to assume you're not exclusive. And so I think you probably are, what I would do in those situations, have done in those situations, is really being able to say, is this just a natural kind of little twinge of jealousy, a little twinge of insecurity that he might like her better or something like that? And if it's something that I can manage and self-soothe, because I know it's coming from within, I just live with it. If it's really starting to ramp up because I am, my feelings for this person are increasing, I am noticing that we've been on several dates, I'd like to move this forward, I think that's a good sign that it's probably time to have that conversation about exclusivity. Like, hey, I got the sense that you might have been out on a date this week, and that's totally okay because, we're dating other people, but I kind of wish we weren't.
Okay.
And what do you think about that? Right. And that's so uncomfortable. I can say that out loud and my brain just went, you're so good at giving advice. What's the saying? Coaches don't play.
Yeah.
But I think that is something that I have heard before, as a recommendation, and something I would certainly want to use instead of sitting back, sort of hoping that I can gather clues as to what the
Yeah.
status is, saying very just, honestly, without implied pressure or hostility or anything like that, just, hey, I would love it if this was just you and I, and what do you think about that? Where are you at with that?
And being okay with whatever answer comes after that.
And recognizing, you might feel really uncomfortable with it, but that might give you an answer, is that this isn't compatible. Because if you are at the phase where you want to be exclusive and they don't, then you are at different phases. And if you can't reconcile that, then that in and of itself might be, a constraint that you can't get over.
Right. Yeah. That to your point is literally incompatibility, and expecting somebody to change their mind for you is probably not the best strategy to go about it.
No. And I don't think you can force that on someone. I think you can be open and honest with them and let them know that you enjoy spending time with them, but where you're at with this is, you would like to be exclusive, and that exclusivity is reciprocal. And if it isn't, then you're going to have to, move on to something else. And I don't view that as an ultimatum. Sometimes people think that telling someone cause and effect is an ultimatum, and it really isn't in my mind, because you're just laying it out for them without expectation of behavior change.
Yeah.
You're saying, if this is true, which it sounds like it is, here's where I'm at, which to me is more of a boundary than an ultimatum.
Yeah. And through that honesty, you're actually being kind to that person of like, hey, this is my honest truth, and I accept your honest truth. And if it doesn't match, then I accept the fact that we're not going to be together. And that in and of itself is a really kind way to approach letting go or accepting, yeah, hey, we are exclusive or we aren't.
Yeah. And this is through a lot of self-reflection and realizing that I sat uncomfortable and confused in many early dating relationships, situationships, whatever we're defining these kind of not quite together, but certainly doing something phases of dating. And really reflecting back on where I dismissed my own personal power to get the answers that I needed to feel comfortable, or at least have clarity one way or the other. I may not feel comfortable in the sense that I like the answer, but confusion is also a very uncomfortable place to be sitting, and being able to resolve that through asking my own questions rather than taking this passive, well, I'm a woman and he's supposed to ask me to be his girlfriend, or I don't want to pressure him too much and scare him. I've lived in that place for so long, this messaging that society gives us that, and so many dating coaches do this. I'm sure that doing this yourself, you come across ones that are just, they are not, their advice is really awful, because it's this advice to women, which is just, take a back burner in your own life, take the back seat in your own life, and let the man lead absolutely everything, to the expense of your own needs and your own, satisfaction in the relationship. Don't ask him where you're at, or what the status of the relationship is, lest you scare him off, which just creates a really strange imbalance of power and choice in that relationship.
Yeah, and I certainly hear you describing a relationship that's not built on a very strong foundation of trust and communication and honesty either. And that brings us to like the phrase that I hear tossed around way too much of, like, if he wanted to, he would.
Oh,
well,
I hate that one.
you're giving away your power in that particular case.
Yeah.
If you want something, ask for it. If that person can't give it to you, then they're not your person.
Yeah, I think that it overlooks the communication of what it is you want, because maybe he's not doing it, or she's not doing it because they don't actually know. I mean, this assumption that the right person for us is just going to always know what we need and want at any given time is idealistic, but rarely proves true. This is another human being who's getting to know you, and the way that they're going to do that is either through trial and error or direct communication. And the faster route is always going to be the direct one.
Yeah.
But I think I also really don't like that phrase, because I think what it does is discounts the fact that lots of people want to do things in their lives, but they can't, because they're emotionally not in the right place, because they've got other things going on in their lives, because whatever the reason might be, they've got an avoidant attachment style, and they're very, very activated, and they're now going into deactivation to make themselves feel safe again. And so this closeness, this intimacy has triggered a lot for them. What I think, if he wanted to, he would does is suggest that this is all about whether or not you are good enough, because then he would do the thing. And I think there's just so much more to it than that. Like, there's just far too many country music songs about the one that got away, that I will ever be convinced that no one messes up a good thing, that they wanted to, they couldn't, and so they didn't.
Sam, thank you so very much for that closing thought on something that I've been mulling over quite a bit, especially that phrase that comes up a lot. So if people want to get a hold of you and your message resonates with them, what's the best way for them to do that?
So I think a great place to find everything is on my Twitter at It's Sam G. There is a link tree in my bio there. So I'm fairly active, or pretty active on Twitter and the other platforms as well. But the link tree will get you to everything, including the Where's Our Participation Trophy podcast. We've got that on all the major platforms for podcasts, as well as YouTube. We release new episodes every Monday. So and feel free to follow our socials, Where's Our Trophy, on Instagram and Twitter as well.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Samantha. I'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thank you.